She was born into shame, raised among whispers, trained to entertain men. But by the time she died, she ruled an empire. This is not a fairy tale. This is Theodora, the woman who seduced fate itself. Who was Theodora? A prostitute? A puppet? Or the power behind the most ambitious emperor in Byzantine history? This is the untold story of a woman who clawed her way from filth to the throne and changed the fate of an empire.
Before she became the most powerful woman in the Byzantine Empire, Theodora was just a name among the nameless. She was born around 500 AD in Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire. But her world wasn't gold and marble. Her father, a bear trainer in the Hippodrome, the empire's blood-soaked coliseum of sport, politics, and chaos. When he died suddenly, her mother, desperate, tried to pass his job to one of her daughters. No one listens to widows. And daughters, they're just mouths to feed. So Theodora, barely more than a child, was pushed into the only profession left for the forgotten, acting. But in Byzantine society, an actress wasn't a performer. It was a euphemism for prostitute. Imagine being 12 years old, dancing for drunk aristocrats, whispering lies you don't understand, and pretending to enjoy hands you can't escape. But Theodora was no ordinary girl. She wasn't just watching the crowd, she was studying them. She memorized how men spoke, how they lied, how they bartered power like coins. She laughed with them while quietly planning to outplay them all. By her teens, she was known across the capital, not just for her beauty, but for her sharp tongue, her wit, and her unflinching boldness. One chronicler, Procopius, described her in his secret history as a woman of shameless appetite, obscene performances, and unspeakable acts. But ask yourself, was that slander from a bitter historian, or fear from men who saw what she could become?
Some run from pain. Others walk into it, knowing that fire can forge steel. After years of performing, surviving, and enduring scandal in Constantinople, Theodora vanished from the capital. She sailed south to North Africa with a powerful Syrian official who promised her a new life. It was her first taste of aristocracy. Silks instead of stage dust. Tables instead of taverns. For a moment, she lived as the woman she was never allowed to be. But the dream shattered. The man abandoned her, alone, penniless, exiled in a foreign land. And yet it was here, in her deepest humiliation, that Theodora was reborn. She didn't return to the stage. She didn't sell herself again. Instead, she journeyed further south, through Egypt, into the holy Christian communities of the desert. Some say she sought penance. Others believe she sought power through understanding faith, ideology, and control. She saw the church not as salvation, but as influence. Not as divine, but as political. These weren't aimless travels. They were reconnaissance. She was learning the language of power, not just from emperors and generals, but from bishops and saints. By the time she returned to Constantinople, she wasn't a courtesan anymore. She was something new, dangerous, unpredictable. And she caught the eye of the most powerful bachelor in the empire, Justinian. This was no accident. This was her first real target. And Justinian would be her key to the throne. When Theodora returned to the capital, she was no longer the girl dancing for coins. She was calm, controlled, and armed with something far more dangerous than beauty: intention. She began working as a wool spinner in a modest house near the palace, a quiet job, a forgotten corner, a perfect hiding place for a woman watching everything. But it wouldn't last, because across the marble halls of the great palace, the eyes of Justinian, heir to the Byzantine Empire, had fallen on her. Some say he fell in love instantly. Others say she planned the whole encounter. He was a rising political force, the nephew of Emperor Justin I, brilliant, stern, obsessed with order and law. She was scandal incarnate, a former actress, a known courtesan, a walking nightmare for conservative courtiers. But Justinian, he didn't care. He was captivated by her wit, her clarity, her fearlessness in saying what no one else dared. She didn't flirt, she challenged him. He wanted to marry her. But Roman law forbade men of the senatorial class from marrying actresses, even retired ones. So what did Justinian do? He changed the law. Not bent it, not worked around it. He rewrote the rules of the empire just to make her his wife. That's how dangerous Theodora's charm truly was. They married in 525 AD, and from the moment she entered the palace, Theodora was no empress in waiting. She wasn't content with silk and ceremonies. She wanted to shape policy, shape religion, shape history. For most women in Rome, marriage was the end of ambition. For Theodora, it was the beginning of conquest. Together, they were unstoppable. Not just lovers, but co-rulers in everything but name. But their bond would soon be tested, because just 7 years later, Constantinople would burn in rebellion, and the empire would look to Theodora for salvation. And when Justinian wanted to run, it was Theodora who stood her ground. In January of 532 AD, the empire trembled. It began as a sporting riot. It ended as a civil war. Two rival factions, the Blues and the Greens, normally obsessed with chariot racing, suddenly united against taxes, against corruption, against Justinian. And just like that, Constantinople burned. The Nika riots, the most devastating uprising in Byzantine history, brought the empire to its knees. Over 30,000 rebels flooded the city, chanting Nika, Nika, conquer, conquer. Justinian's rule crumbled by the hour. Senators turned on him. Generals hesitated. The mob declared a new emperor. In the palace, chaos reigned. And Justinian? He was ready to flee. "We can build again," his advisors urged. "But not if you're dead." He prepared a ship. His guards gathered gold. The empire was seconds away from losing its crown. And then, Theodora stood up. She said just 30 words, but they changed history forever. "My lords," she said, "the present occasion is too serious for me to follow the convention that a woman should not speak in a man's council. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. I will never live to see the day I am not saluted as empress. Royalty," she said, "is a fine burial shroud." In that moment, it was no longer about survival. It was about dignity, about power, about legacy. Justinian didn't flee. Instead, he ordered General Belisarius to strike back. And when the rebels packed into the hippodrome cheering their victory, the gates slammed shut. Troops entered from both ends, swords drawn, arrows loosed. Over 30,000 men slaughtered. The blood of the city washed the marble red. Constantinople was saved. But it wasn't Justinian's courage that saved it. It was Theodora. That night, she didn't just preserve an empire. She proved that power doesn't always come from bloodlines, crowns, or armies. Sometimes, it comes from a woman who refuses to kneel. From that moment on, no one dared to call her a mere empress. She was a co-ruler, a tactician, a queen forged in fire. But Theodora wasn't done. She had plans for women, for religion, for the very soul of the Byzantine Empire, and nothing, not bishops, not nobles, not even her husband, would stop her.
After the blood dried in the hippodrome, Theodora did not fade into the background. She didn't bask in gratitude or pose for mosaics. She got to work, quietly, relentlessly, strategically. She wasn't crowned a co-emperor, but she didn't need a title, because within the palace walls, no decision passed without her voice, and outside them, her influence seeped into every layer of society. The empire was fracturing under religious tension. Justinian, a staunch Orthodox Chalcedonian, wanted to crush the heretical sects. But Theodora? She supported the heretics, specifically the Miaphysites, a Christian group considered dangerous by the church. She funded underground churches, hid exiled bishops, and even negotiated with foreign patriarchs behind her husband's back. Was it rebellion? Was it compassion? Or was she building a shadow church loyal to her alone? Historians still debate, but one thing is clear. Religious leaders feared her more than the emperor. While Justinian codified Roman law, Theodora rewrote social reality. She pushed through radical reforms for women, banning forced prostitution, expanding divorce rights for abused wives, granting property rights to women, creating safe houses for former sex workers. A woman who once danced for coins now rewrote the laws that once shackled her. But don't mistake mercy for weakness. Theodora also ordered assassinations. One general dared to conspire against her. He vanished at sea. A noblewoman insulted her publicly. She was forced into a convent for life. Theodora believed in justice, but it was her version, brutal, strategic, and always absolute. While Justinian focused on rebuilding Rome's old borders, Theodora played a different game. She hosted Persian envoys in secret. She intervened in Armenian politics. She even helped install a puppet pope, one loyal to her theology. She was never seen, but always felt. Even foreign kings whispered her name and wondered which emperor really ruled Constantinople. Some loved her, others feared her. The chronicler Procopius, in his secret history, painted her as a monster, cruel in her vengeance, insatiable in desire, demonic in her ambition. But can we trust him? He worked for Justinian and feared women with voices. What if she wasn't the villain? What if she was the only one honest enough to wield power as it truly was, raw, ruthless, and real? Look closely at the mosaics in Ravenna, one of the few surviving portraits of Theodora. She wears a crown, jewels, purple robes. But her expression? It isn't soft, it's unreadable. A look forged by betrayal, survival, and triumph. She began as a whisper, rose as a scandal, ruled as a shadow. And by the time death came for her, she had already carved her name into the bones of an empire.
Power made her eternal, but time made her disappear. Around 548 AD, at the height of her power, Theodora died. No final public speech, no grand farewell, just silence. Some say it was cancer, others whisper poison. Perhaps enemies struck when she finally let her guard down. Or maybe the fire that burned so hot for decades simply burned itself out. She was about 48 years old, still young, still dangerous. And Justinian? He never remarried. He buried her beside him inside the imperial mausoleum. For all his laws, his battles, his grand designs, it was her absence that broke him. History didn't know what to do with Theodora. To some, she was a saint, canonized by the Miaphysite Church. To others, a prostitute in royal robes, whose sins stained the empire. And to many historians, a riddle. Was she feminist before her time, or tyrant in disguise? What do you call a woman who redefined empire but never asked permission? A legend or a threat? Procopius called her inhuman, but his writings, hidden in a locked chest until after his death, only confirm one truth: she haunted him. Theodora's fingerprints are still etched into stone. The mosaics of Ravenna, where she stands taller than the men beside her. The women's rights laws she pushed that outlasted her. The hidden sects of Christianity she protected, which survived thanks to her shelter. She didn't just change her world, she prepared the world to change itself.
She began as an object of pleasure. She died as an object of fear and awe. History may try to clean her name or bury it, but Theodora will not be forgotten. If this story moved you, if you believe history belongs not just to emperors, but to the women who outwitted them, then hit subscribe, because there are more legends in the shadows waiting to rise.